Hi, I'm Lizzie.
And I'm Brenda.
And welcome back to
Small Step Society.
This is Season 2, Episode 6, Building Trust.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Another week, another episode, and this week we're going to talk about trust. But before we talk about trust, we have to do our weekly segment, which is
Song of the Moment. So what's your song of the moment?
my song of the moment is called 17 by Pink Sweats. So I just learned a couple minutes ago that there's 17 by Pink Sweats and a remix of 17 by Pink Sweats featuring two members of 17.
The K-pop band.
Yes. And I was listening to 17 the remix.
But I've listened to 17, the original.
Yes.
Crazy connections here.
Yes.
Especially because we never have overlapping music.
I know, but this song is like so cute.
Yeah.
It's such a love song and it's so cute. So
Yeah.
I was listening to that. Yeah. How about you?
My song is Shiver by Hazlitt. It's a bit of a sad song, but I really like the lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
So, trust. We wanted to start off with self-trust. We're like building trust with yourself and then kind of branch out into general trust.
Yep.
And Linda and Charlie Bloom on Psychology Today defined self-trust as the firm reliance on the integrity of yourself. Yeah. So, why is self-trust important?
Well, Cynthia Wall, a psychotherapist, wrote a book called The Courage to Trust, a guide to building deep and lasting relationships, because as we all know, trust is very important to building relationships, both with ourselves and others. So in this book, she wrote, the person you need to trust first is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
No one can be as consistently supportive of you as you can learn to be. Being kind to yourself increases self-confidence and lessens your need for approval.
Mm-hmm.
Loving and caring for yourself not only increases self-trust, it also deepens your connection with others.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same way, in the past episodes, we've been talking about how empathy allows you to not only like connect with yourself, but connect with others. In the same way, trusting yourself also leads to trusting others and, I guess, forming deeper connections with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Linda and Charlie Bloom also say that there's a noticeable difference between a life that is grounded in self-trust and a life that is not, because those who have the self-trust tend to be more confident in their decisions and have like clarity in their choices. And also they're often independent with a healthy dependency on others, so they're not hyper independent and they're not overly dependent either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they can also speak with authority on their choices that doesn't come from a place of arrogance.
Mm.
And also they can continue to improve by observing and pulling from their experiences, whether they're successes or failures, because they have they have clarity on their choices and like they trust in their decisions and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like a personal, I guess, example of this is going back to our episode about alone time.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like over the past couple of years in college, I've learned to trust myself more and like learn the difference between not wanting to hang out with others because I just don't like them versus like needing my like own space.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, I've been able to trust myself more. And so when I make the decision to, you know, take time to myself instead of saying yes to every single plan that is offered, I feel more at peace with myself. And then I'm also able to explain it to people without like coming across as rude as much or you know, anything like that. So how do people lose trust with themselves? Well, they tend to make decisions that may end in some sort of outcome that isn't what they wanted or expected. And so once they make the decision, they feel a regret, which leads to shame. And then that's kind of an endless cycle because also, like we talked about in the last episode, shame stays with you. So people who are making decisions that maybe end in aversive outcomes, they start becoming caught up in the past and like not being able to let go with why that decision led to a bad outcome. And so they end up like going to others to make the decisions for them, where they, you know, maybe are just less likely to make decisions themselves, generally speaking.
Yeah. And also kind of along the same vein is that your inner critic goes rogue to a sense. Like if your inner critic gets the best of you, which is kind of like self-doubt, like you don't trust in your decisions, then and you can't stand up to the critic, then a lot of times decisions kind of get blown out of proportion because it could have been a small decision, but because you're doubting yourself so much, it becomes a big decision.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then another thing is like worrying about the future of, I think this is pretty common, but like fearing the possibility of something going wrong, it like pulls you back from making your like gut decisions. And as we talked about being caught in the past, if you're caught in the past and worrying about your future, then when are you going to enjoy the present, right?
Yeah.
You're in a cycle, like a little seesaw of past and future, past and future. Yeah, and also if you're not in the present, then how will you slow down and be like, oh, I messed that one up, but how can I fix it, you know?
Right. Like if you're just constantly worrying about what you've done and just worrying about what's going to come, you're never going to be content with any sort of decision you had to make in your life, especially when it starts spiraling and you can't even make like a simple decision of like, when do I eat lunch? You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's better to nip it in the bud instead of letting the problem go on and fester.
But on the flip side of things, worrying is a defense mechanism. So it is very understandable that we are worrying about the future and fearing that things will go wrong. Bringing Linda and Charlie Bloom back from Psychology Today, they say that as soon as we stop focusing on the future, we feel anxious and vulnerable. When we are present, we feel unprotected, and the challenge is to cultivate a courageous heart that can tolerate increasing longer periods of presence. By cultivating tolerance for being in the anxiety for longer periods of time, we are not enslaved by fear, and self-trust automatically grows stronger. So this kind of rehashes that we are kind of wired to always worry and think about the future, but once we exercise being in the present more, then we'll get used to it, and then self-trust will kind of grow along with it as well.
I think adding on to that, it is like the defense mechanism like you talked about, because it's so much easier to just like if you don't trust yourself, it's so much easier to, you know, if we're still using the example of making a decision, rely on others around you to make the decision for you, or rely on even like rolling the dice and just seeing like whatever random outcome happens and choosing that, because then you don't have to put the blame on yourself. But you're in some sense, when you do that, you're kind of running away from the problem, because if it goes wrong, like you're still not going to be happy with the outcome, even if it's a bad one. You just at least allowed yourself to not feel guilt. Whereas if you truly go with your gut in an outcome or in a decision and it goes wrong, if you truly stuck to what you believe in, then I think you would probably feel better in that case.
Yeah, because I think it's like, oh, dang, that was a wrong choice, but I like put my all to it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay, like next time I won't do that type of thing. It's kind of like when a couple episodes ago when you were talking about recruiting, and even though you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, you had put your all in it and it made you feel proud of yourself at the end. I feel like it's a little different, but it's kind of the same concept of if you trust your gut feeling and the outcome isn't what you expected, you're still okay with the outcome.
Yeah. So now we come to the question of the day.
Yes.
How do you build trust with yourself? So I guess this actually stems pretty directly from what we just talked about, but it's very important to know what it is important to you. And so that does take a lot of time of figuring out your values and figuring out what you believe in, and also like weighing the different stuff you believe in against each other, because there are a lot of different scenarios in which you're making decisions where, let's just take like a really simple example of like college, and you're going to a party and you know someone's peer pressuring you. You have to weigh like the feeling of FOMO and the feeling of like wanting to connect with others against like your morals, like if you don't drink, not drinking, if you don't, you know, anything like that. So not only knowing like what you believe in, but also knowing where they stand against each other is very important to going with your gut and then trusting yourself. So like in that scenario, knowing that even if you don't end up drinking, you will be more content because you know you did the right thing, or you know whatever the decision is. So I think that's very important. I think it's also important, like if you are a very analytical thinker, kind of listing out the pros and cons of trusting yourself, and also thinking about what you could lose if you don't trust yourself. Like if you don't go with your gut, what are you going to lose? Well, I think you're going to lose I guess, like a sense of connection with yourself because
Mhm.
you're straying away from what you believe in. And so it can lead to like a lot of spiralization of what do I even believe in? Oh my
Mhm.
God, I don't know who I am, you know?
Yeah. And on a more like lighter topic, it's like when you choose a test answer and it was your gut feeling and then you change it and then later
Mhm.
it turns out your gut feeling was right. You're like, ah, I could have gotten that right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then it's just, that happens to me so much. But every time that happens, I think to myself, I'm like, wow, I really should trust myself
Mhm.
because I do know what I'm doing.
Right.
So it's almost like a reverse
Yeah.
outcome, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also, so like if there's a scenario in which you are constantly making a decision or you constantly have to trust yourself,
Mhm.
I think it's important to set goals for yourself, but also
Mhm.
make them sensible ones, something that you can actually achieve. And so there is a technique called SMART goals, and SMART stands for something. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. So specific means not just saying, I'm going to trust myself.
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually mean? What scenario specifically are you talking about?
Mhm.
Measurable means that you should set a goal that you can actually see results from, or like actually, I guess, almost like count what's happening rather than just saying, I'm going to trust myself in this specific outcome, just generally speaking. I'll give a scenario. This is a really, really kind of dumb one. But every time I'm in the grocery store,
Mhm.
I like get really like stressed out about like if I'm choosing like to buy a certain like let's say I'm trying to buy peanut butter.
Okay.
I will look at every single peanut butter for way too long just to make sure that I'm picking the right choice.
Mhm.
And so almost like in that sense, just setting a quantity of I am going to just look for 30 seconds and then I'm done, okay?
Mhm.
And just sticking with whatever I come up with.
Mhm.
So I think in that sense that goes great to attainable because it's a very easy, like it's actually achievable. It's not like some grand goal that, you know, you don't really know whether it can happen.
Yeah.
And so it's also, I guess, going into realistic. And then also with timely, set a time frame for yourself. It can't just be like, I'm going to trust myself sometime in the next 2 months. Okay. You're going to forget about it or you're just going to keep procrastinating. So actually setting a goal timeline-wise is also very important.
Nice. Those are really nice, like, quote-unquote pillars of, like, just kind of start trusting yourself.
Yeah, I think it's also made, like, that framework's also used in, like, every single scenario ever, like, even in the workplace.
Yeah, nice.
So also with trusting yourself is knowing the balance between going to other people and going to people that are maybe wiser than you for advice and also listening to yourself. So I think it is a very important skill in life to not only listen to your own opinion, but it is great to hear the opinions of those around you, especially if they are trusted advisors, trusted people in your life. And so going to them for advice, but ultimately in the end, you need to follow your gut or follow your voice. I think, so I feel like I've always heard in psychology, but a large portion of people who like roll dice to make a decision or like do heads or tails, in their mind, they are hoping for something. Like, I feel like we've all been in that situation where we're like, okay, I'll flip the coin. Oh, I really hope it lands on tails. You know what I mean?
Right.
And at that point, okay, you have your decision.
Right.
Sure, flip the coin just to make yourself feel better, but you know your decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we always have a decision, and sometimes we just need to like figure out where it is in our head.
That's good.
Yeah. And then another one is making sure that you've been eating, that you've been drinking water, that you've been sleeping before making a big choice. Making any choice, but especially a big one.
Yes. That's why when you go to the dentist and you get your wisdom teeth out and you're under anesthesia, they're like, do not let them make big decisions because you're not fully capable of thinking through all the options and making a decision.
Yeah.
So I think making sure you're in good condition is key.
Yeah.
For sure. What does self-trust look like to you?
Well, if I knew. I think self-trust looks like being honest with yourself even when you are hearing all these different voices from around you, especially if they're all telling you different things. Yeah, I think that's very important. And it's very, very difficult.
Yes.
I think another one is putting yourself first, even if it does mean giving something up, which goes directly into knowing your values. like the scenario I talked about earlier, you have to put your values first, even if it means that maybe you'll lose a friend, or even if it means that you have to miss out on like one opportunity. You got to put yourself first. Another thing that comes with self-trust is also holding yourself accountable for good things and for bad things. So with holding yourself accountable, I think I have a very silly example, but say you have a friend. No, say you are wearing a really ugly outfit and you have a friend and you ask them, hey, does my outfit look bad? And they look you in the eyes and they say, no, it looks great. But in their head, they know it's ugly. You're probably, and then you find out, like, you look back at the night in the pictures and you're like, wow, that looks horrible. You will probably not go to that friend and ask that question to them again, at least for a little bit. So the same way, you need to hold yourself accountable for good and bad things, because if you don't, you're going to look back and say, oh, I can't trust myself because I don't even, like, I'm not even honest with myself. You know what I mean? Yeah. And also, something that's very important is also still supporting yourself if you do change your mind about things. It's okay if you make a decision and then 2 weeks down the line you want to change it. That just happens. You're growing as a person every single day.
True.
So you got to give yourself some grace.
Yes. So we talked about what self-trust looks like, but what does it not look like?
I think it doesn't look like always considering how others will be affected by your decisions. And what I mean by that is, obviously, you should still have empathy in your decisions, like especially when they are somewhat more social and they actually do affect people. But if you're receiving advice from a bunch of different people and you believe in one, like piece more than another, you should go with whatever you believe in, even if that means that like that other person who gave you advice might feel a little hurt that you didn't go with their opinion, which I feel like can be really hard, especially when you are asking people for their opinions, to say, hey, I understand and I respect your opinion here, but I actually do think I'm going to go with this person's advice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's one. Another thing is, it shouldn't look like hiding yourself to protect other people's feelings, which I think we touched on this a bit, but just to reiterate, it means sticking with your gut, knowing your values, and not, letting yourself go just because you want other people to feel good about themselves, especially if they feel good about themselves because you're not doing what you believe in. And so in that same line, it also does not look like being mean to yourself.
We think trust is the basis of everything, right? Relationships, I mean, like, think about the cheerleaders. Like, they can't do their competitions, they can't do their stunts if they don't have trust in themselves. Like, if you don't trust a person that's, like, holding you up, how are you gonna be up there,
Yeah. And that's actually a good point, because that requires trusting yourself to, like, be able, because in case you don't know, cheerleading requires a lot of, like, core strength, even if you are, like, the flyer, like the person going up there. So yeah, trusting yourself and trusting your teammates.
And there's a lot of trust, especially if it's like a bigger formation from the foundation up to the top. So yeah. But in general, trust is where everything starts. And Frances Fry and Ann Morris from the Harvard Business Review said, trust is the reason we're willing to exchange our hard-earned paychecks for goods and services, pledge our lives to another person in marriage, and cast a ballot for someone who will represent our interests. And yeah, they just about covered it. Trust is a basis of every little thing in your life, whether it be for big decisions or small decisions, right?
Yeah, like especially when you're learning how to drive, you gotta learn that trust almost, to like trust the people on the road to actually follow their rules and not go crazy.
Right. And in the same article by the Harvard Business Review, they said there are 3 core drivers of trust, which is authenticity, logic, and empathy. And authenticity is that people tend to trust you when they believe they are interacting with the real you, which kind of ties back into not hiding ourselves to make other people feel good, right?
Yeah.
Which we just talked about. And then logic is when they have faith in your judgment and competence. And I think if you have the conviction in your decision, then other people can see that, the confidence and the clarity.
Yeah.
And they also have the trust in your logic.
Yeah, and we all know there's no better feeling than like someone coming to you for advice because they know that they can trust you.
And then lastly, empathy is when they feel that you care about them. Then there's like the connection and the trust in the relationship. Kind of like coming to you for advice because you know that they care and will give you the good advice, right? And this article was more geared towards businesses and leadership opportunities and things more professional, but I think it can be related in just bigger sense in like social everyday life, because we covered authenticity a little bit in vulnerability. And logic, I kind of mentioned, like if you exemplify good decisions, then people will be like, wow, they're good. They're good at making decisions. They're good at making good decisions, right?
Yeah.
And then empathy we covered in the power of connection.
Yeah, but I just to also, I guess, kind of connect empathy and logic, I feel like there is also there's kind of a balance between having empathy and being logical.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone comes to you for advice, I feel like they're never wanting like a solely analytical piece of advice, but they're also not like wanting you to just like tiptoe around their feelings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so knowing the other person, like knowing what they want from you, and even like clarifying what they want from you can also be extremely helpful.
Yes. Mm-hmm. We had an episode regarding that, I think it's season 1 with communication.
Yeah.
Where it's not a bad idea to ask when someone's coming to you for help, do you want a solution or do you want me to just be open ears for you?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that could be a good tie-in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't have much else to say about trust in general because we covered extensively on self-trust, and that kind of like pulls out into
I feel like you can take everything that you use to build trust with yourself and then build trust with others in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so rebuilding trust, I think, is a great segue from last week's episode on forgiveness, because forgiving others and taking the first step to reconciliation is the first step of building trust and building a relationship again. And I think in general, it's hard to completely mend a relationship because think of it as this way. You are, like, your relationship is a panel of glass, right? It could be really, really thick glass, like tempered glass.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a good relationship. But some major conflict causes you to drop it, where something like comes in between it, and then it shatters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can glue it back together. You can put it back together, but you can still see the crack marks and like the scars of like where your relationship wasn't as good,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think it's hard to completely mend the relationship. But then as I was thinking, but maybe it's because we try to put the relationship back the way it was. Like we try to glue the glass pieces the back.
Like exactly where they were.
Right. But maybe it was supposed to go together in a different way, and then it'll create an even more beautiful artwork.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because like whatever experience you have, they all change you in some way, especially if it's such a big one, like to break a relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
That was just my little train of thought. All that to say, I think rebuilding relationships are hard, but it's not impossible. And you don't have to rebuild relationships to the way that it was, you know?
Yeah, like there's no point of keeping that like perfect ideal in your mind because you're never going to have the same exact relationship as you had, and that's perfectly okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I think a great way to rebuild trust is to work together, and both parties, or how many other parties are in the relationship, they need to show commitment to rebuilding trust.
Yes.
And that often requires a lot of communication, and it requires saying, like, if it was as simple as like drifting apart, just saying, being more transparent about why you can't make plans or something like that, like just being really mindful of being open with the other person. So like normally if you were in the past, like you would just say, oh, can't make it. This time you explain why, and you try to show that you're not just like making excuses, or you're not just like, you're not trying to hurt them, but you know, just being really communicative.
Yes, for sure.
And the other thing is setting clear boundaries as you progress in rebuilding. Like we said, you can't just expect everything to go back to the way it was, because if you do that, you're only temporarily fixing the problem. So instead, set clear boundaries of, okay, we're going to start hanging out maybe like once a month. And slowly we're going to get to once a week.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that also requires communication. So my key takeaway is that communication is key.
True.
Yes.
It always is.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot trust yourself, you cannot even trust your mistrust of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that without this underlying trust in the whole system of nature, you are simply paralyzed. When we read this quote, it took us a few tries to get what it meant.
Yes.
So for a little rundown, it basically just is saying that if you're not able to trust yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you suddenly start doubting every little thing, even in the process of not trusting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole system of trust essentially is almost like debilitating. Like, we've all been in that situation where we're like, I don't know what to do, so we just like freeze up and everything, like our mind goes blank. And yeah, that's what this quote is saying. So basically, it's just important to trust yourself so you never reach that point of like basically breaking down and having to start up from scratch about trusting yourself and trusting others and the whole system of trust.
Yes. And this quote was by Alan Watts. And yeah, we covered a lot about self-trust, trust with others, rebuilding trust. But yeah, thanks for listening and trusting us through this episode and the episodes in the past and for episodes to come.
This marks 4 weeks since we told you. We gave you a little challenge to connect with others.
Yes.
So hopefully you made 2 new friends or at least, started talking to 2 new people. But let us know, I guess.
Yes, let us know in the comments how
And
you
if
did.
and if you didn't, that's perfectly okay. Just keep trying.
Yes.
And with that, we can end this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to keep up with us, you can follow us at Small Step Society Pod on Instagram. But we do post episodes every single Sunday. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find podcasts except where you can't. And you can also watch us on YouTube. And with that, we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Bye.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.